Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Briar Haus Writes. I'm Becky Parker, and today it is my honor to be able to have award-winning author with us today, Luke Salisbury. Um, he is the author of The Answer is Baseball, The Cleveland Indian, Blue Eden, Hollywood and Sunset, and my personal favorite that I'm reading, No Common War. Luke, welcome to our program.
Well, good morning and thank you for having me.
Luke, I know you've written lots more than just these, but these are the books that I think people may know you by. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
My mother was Southern and my father was from New York City. So already I had a series of relatives on both sides that were very interesting. My mother never stopped talking. My father talked rarely. You can guess which one I'm like. We also lived in a number of different places. I grew up in the suburbs of New York, first in a wealthy town where my father taught school. Then we moved to a less wealthy town. I went to public school, I went to private school, I went to boarding school, I went to college in Florida. And then, perhaps most interestingly, to get a draft deferment, I had to teach third grade in the Bronx. So I learned a whole lot about America and New York City I wouldn't have seen otherwise. Also, for the summer, if you're reading No Common War, that's where my grandfather is from, and that is about, his father in the Civil War. And what was interesting was the people that I got to know up there, they were farmers. They had a whole different way of talking. They're country people. And I must say, I worked hard not to get drafted. The guys I drank with didn't get drafted either. They joined the Marine Corps. It was that kind of place, that kind of time. So I was very lucky in being in lots of different places. But I've spent most of my life either lived in New York City for a while or 50 some years here outside of Boston. And God forbid I haven't picked up one single word the natives say. The natives are strange. They have a strange dialect here.
And you don't
But
have any of their vernaculars at all?
a little bit. I'll try to make fun of it sometime. But if you watch movies, nobody can do that accent. Well, I'm told it's very hard to do a real Southern accent unless you're Meryl Streep, who could do anything. But even the actors from here, they lose the ability to do it when they go away. And unfortunately, it's a generational thing. I have a friend that has a wonderful accent, but his kids don't have it. So,
Well, tell me what led you to actually writing
well,
and what
I
keeps you there?
Oh, I can tell you. I think Nabokov said there are two kinds of writers, those that have to be and those that want to be. And I think we all start out as a little bit of both, or maybe a lot of both, but you're going to find out pretty quickly. It's so much work. I'm talking about writing novels and prose, and I'm not talking about writing flash fiction. That's another world. And it's just very difficult.
Hmm.
But and I always thought I would be a writer because I was better at history because I couldn't spell. And it was a great delight when I found out that one of my heroes, F. Scott Fitzgerald, couldn't spell. And I said I was creative rather than a person that could spell. But it was reading The Great Gatsby at 17 under a tree in Princeton, New Jersey, where I was a boarding student at the Hun School. And that was it. I just said, I want to spend the rest of my life trying to write this book. I know I never will, but that's what I want to do. And so that was the beginning. And oh boy, I got to tell you, after I taught school in the Bronx, I wrote a 500 handwritten page memoir novel. That was the summer of 1970. As Buddy Holly said when the Crickets first went to Nashville, thought it would be money, girls, and Cadillacs by Christmas. It wasn't. I didn't get a book published, a book. I had articles and stories published until 1989. So anybody that's in it's going to be a long battle. But in the end, that's the only thing that ever held me together and made life interesting. And that can be difficult because I didn't want to have a career other than that. So I was very lucky when I got to teach at a community college because that was a perfect balance of many things. But as you know, if you write, it's a very, very difficult way to spend your life. And you got to spend a lot of it alone. And it's very selfish because you need to write prose. You need long stretches of being by yourself. So marry a woman with a good job or a man with a good job, as I've been lucky enough. But the other influence on me, and this is interesting because with The Great Gatsby, he just caught, and it's all there on the first page, the tone of this world that I was, supposed to be from, like Nick Carraway. I was in and out of it. Went to school with rich people, went to prep school. Now,
Mhm.
and also, this is on the North Shore of Long Island, where I grew up. And when my family moved from Oyster Bay to Huntington, that was the equivalent of going from East Egg to West Egg. And so, then being in Fitzgerald went to a prep school nobody's heard of that doesn't exist called Newman Prep in New Jersey before he went to Princeton. But Fitzgerald was a 5 foot 5 inch Irish Catholic, and I'm a 6 foot 1 inch wasp, but I thought I was F. Scott Fitzgerald. And all I can say is what Yogi Berra said when he heard the mayor of Dublin was Jewish, only in America. And but the other influence, and this I got to, was Faulkner. And in many ways, that was almost more liberating. I had read Sound and Fury and Absalom Absalom in prep school because the English teachers, who acted very good English teachers, recommended it. And I got to tell you, if you're not in college with a good professor, those books are tough. And you need to approach them the way Faulkner said you should approach Ulysses, which is the way an illiterate Baptist minister approaches the Bible, with faith. And but then when I got to New College, that's just the college in Florida, the governor has just destroyed by turning it into some kind of right-wing baseball academy, New College. There was a professor there, wonderful professor, Dr. Robert Knox, who had written the first PhD thesis on Faulkner at Harvard. And so I'd got to do an independent study with him on those two books. And it just was incredible. And I started writing stories at the same time. But if Fitzgerald was the outside and the style of looking at of a world that I knew and didn't know. Faulkner was an explosion inside that you could let language go, that whatever kind of fury you had in you, and we all have it, otherwise we wouldn't be writing. That, God, sometimes I think his writing approaches the speed of light. There's nobody like him, in my opinion. Which one is the best? I couldn't tell you, but I realized, and I really thought of this while thinking about this question that you asked, that these guys represented in the beginning the outside and the inside of my mental life. How to look at a world I thought I knew, and then how to just let go. My God, when Faulkner writes, it's everything from the subconscious all the way through to the most elaborate style. And so you mentioned, well, what advice would you give people? Read, read, read. Though I believe it was Nabokov that said, when you imitate a writer, and we all do in the beginning, you're really imitating his weaknesses because you can't imitate the great stuff because the Lord just didn't set it up that way.
Well, I think
Long
you
answer to a short question.
No, it's very good because it means that you're very introspective, and that's what we need. Well, as a professor of, English at Bunker Hill Community College, I wanted to ask you, how has this impacted your writing on a worldview scale? And what are the hardships that you face, especially if you have to teach online? How do you connect with your students?
Well, I've got to tell you, I will confess, I'm 77 years old and I retired before COVID and before having to do stuff online. People were beginning to do it online before I retired. They said it's 4 times as much work, and students think you're available all the time. I myself love the face-to-face, but where I was so lucky was Bunker Hill Community College, which happens to be in the movie Good Will Hunting, which most people have seen because it's one of the few movies that acknowledges the American class system. But
Mhm.
unlike that movie, we're not just the hellhole at the end of the orange line. Because as I used to tell my students, we have a subway stop, community college. Hey, that's the same as Boston College and Harvard. We've got our own subway stop. But if you're lucky enough to teach, especially a community college, diversity, of course, because it's a lot of people not from the top of the food chain, but
Mhm.
it's diversity of age. The average age at community college is something like 30. And you get this wonderful mixture. I had a lot of veterans, my God, the Vietnam veterans, and then all of a sudden veterans from the more recent wars. And the surprising was from the more recent wars, women, lots of women. And and they all have lots of stories. I think it was Hemingway that said any man, and he should have meant woman too, who's been in a war zone for 6 months has material to write about for the rest of your life. So I got that was really interesting. And most of the people coming, when they're older, they're trying to get somewhere. And if I'm teaching composition, it isn't someone looking to say that I used the wrong pronouns and trying to get me fired because I made a joke they didn't like. It was people that honestly trying to learn how to write a sentence, write a paragraph so they can get somewhere. And I was also lucky enough the second half of my career to co-chair the honors program. And so we did every semester, people in the program, we would teach an honors seminar because you had to take the seminar to graduate with honors. And so I
Mhm.
would get to pick the things. So we would do evil or women or the atomic bomb, or we were on to climate. Oh, way back at the beginning of this century,
Wow.
somebody came who was really good, and he said, it's not that it's going to be warmer in January, it's the ferocity of storms and the frequency. And that's exactly what's happening. So that was really interesting. I got some wonderful students, and again, diversity of ability. What I didn't have was obnoxious preppies like me who were a pain in the ass in college. And and the other thing is, you ask me what kind of advice might you give a young writer? You better find a way to support yourself. If you're lucky enough to have a trade, good. Writers tend to, it's funny, in the 18th century, they were clergymen like Lawrence Stern, who had lots of free time, I guess. In the 19th century, they began to be reporters at the end of that century, like Stephen Crane or Dickens had been a court reporter. In the 20th century, basically the jobs of teaching. And I think it's very debatable if you teach creative writing, whether that's good or bad for you. I went to an excellent program at Boston University. Leslie
Mhm.
Epstein, runs it. Interestingly enough, Leslie's father and uncle wrote the movie Casablanca. He grew up in a Hollywood family. His son Theo is probably the greatest baseball general manager of all time, having broken the curse in Boston and for the Cubs. Well, he ran a program which was very helpful to me, but I didn't want to teach creative writing because I know I get that editorial voice in my head that you would hear in some of those rough sessions where people were criticizing you. So you got to
Right.
balance out that voice in your head that's critical. And the other thing is, it's just, I've never been able to take rejection very well. I hate it. I'd rather be rejected by the opposite sex than rejected by,
For
you
your
know,
writing.
editor. And so if one's lucky enough to get an agent, they take the nose and then tell you about it. And so everyone says, oh, well, I've got a thick skin, or I don't care. You got to have a thick skin to be a writer. Sure. And even the famous writers, if they get a bad review, that they just fume about it because it's such a difficult game. And I'm talking about novels. The poetry world is better. I found a group here that call themselves the Bagel Bards who would meet on Saturday mornings, mostly poets, and we just sit and talk. And after we finish bitching about publishing, you get to meet people that way. Sometimes people read their stuff, sometimes they don't. So it's not even so much a support group, but how are you going to meet other people? That's very important because it's such a solitary business. And if you have a small group you read stuff to, usually your friends are going to tell you it's good and this and that. I actually have a very good friend, Laurie Paulson, who's written an excellent novel that nobody seems to want to publish. It had a small press that published my book, Hollywood and Sunset, and he said he finally had to quit his writing group because he couldn't think of any more nice things to say about writing that wasn't that good. The way you smile, I think you know all about this.
A
But
lot of people, really brilliant people, struggle with getting their work published, and it's the most ingenious work. And someone told me, well, don't worry about that because there's always being published once you're gone. But no one wants
well,
to really see their work post, post death.
well,
So you
the
got to keep
internet
trying.
and computer has changed everything. Now, everybody can publish a novel if they're willing to. Now, if you're looking at No Common War, that got two great reviews, one from Kirkus and from someplace. Woman said, this is the best war novel I've read in,
Hmm.
20 years or something. I didn't get any more reviews. Now, people I know were nice enough. That's another thing. Get people to go on Amazon and write. They say if you can get 50 people to say how good your book is, that's great. I got about 25, but most of those people I know. So how are you going to draw attention to yourself? Nonfiction's a little different. I think it's
Hmm.
easier to get somewhere, especially if the book you self-publish is about self-help or a new way to do sex. But and poetry is a whole nother world because in novels, at least I grew up with this prejudice. If you're not published in, a major thing, you're in the minor leagues, and that's where you're going to stay. And now that shouldn't be the way it is. So I used to tell my students, we all say, I don't care what people think of me. Of course you do.
You
I
do.
mean, I said, well, some students don't like me, not many, but they're the ones I remember.
And they're the
So
ones you secretly wish liked you very much.
as I used to say to the opposite sex when I was in college and rebuffed, veiled attraction. Well, no, actually, I got along very well with most students, but poetry's a little different.
It
You can
is.
start small and do well. I mean, it's a very tough world if you're looking to be the poet or writer in residence somewhere, and that's what I mean about having a trade. If you're lucky enough to teach at a community college, one, I didn't have to, write literary essays because we just taught. We ended up having to teach 5 classes, but a month off at Christmas, a month off in the summer, maybe teaching 3, probably 4 days a week. So you have time
You have
because
time to write.
time is what you have to find if you're a writer. And then all the other stuff, oh, I didn't get published. It's killing me. Well, that's Ugh. That's
Well,
why
those
it's
are some
own cat and a
challenges that
dog.
you face when you're writing. It's not just that you have the idea, but being able to project that idea into an actual, you know, physical thing that somebody else can pick up and read.
And
Um,
how many times are you going to have to rewrite? I mean, I wrote, 2 or 3 novels that will never be published. I mean, it's a long apprenticeship. Very
mhm.
few people are like F. Scott Fitzgerald to make it immediately right away and then had whatever the life he had afterwards. That's a whole nother story.
Speaking of being able to read your work, how about reading some of yours for us today?
I will. I will. And I want to read you the very beginning of Hollywood and Sunset because I think that's the most complicated novel. The Salisbury, there are 3 Salisbury novels. There's just one that's been published because my grandfather was wounded in the Civil War. His son was a military surgeon, wounded in World War One. God forbid if you can imagine being a military surgeon in that war. My father was missing in action and, was a prisoner of war
Wow.
in Second World War. But this one is about D.W. Griffith. And if people don't know about him, read the book and find out. He basically invented Hollywood by using all sorts of new techniques and doing the most racist movie ever made, Birth of a Nation, which
Mm.
made more money than they could count. He had so much money he wanted to make the greatest movie afterwards. He made one called Intolerance. And one thing to do if you've been accused of anything is put Jesus story in your next movie. There are 4 different stories in Intolerance. Well, this actually happened. I didn't make it up. Guy that played Jesus was an English actor named Howard Gay. He had played, and get this, Robert E. Lee in Birth of a Nation. I mean, Griffith wasn't going to let a Yankee play Robert E. Lee. Well, Gay would dress up in his Jesus robes and drive his Model T around Los Angeles picking up women. Now, I couldn't make that up, but that's how the
Wow.
book starts. The first part, and I will even actually be able to see it, is called Christ on Sunset Boulevard. The time is 1916 when Birth of a Nation is being made. Head high, eyes scanning the hills, Jesus Christ drove Henry Ford's Universal car out of the east. I squinted. It was Howard Gay, the English actor who played Robert E. Lee in Birth of a Nation and Christ in D.W. Griffith's new motion picture. I'd heard Gay liked to drive his Model T around Los Angeles looking for women while dressed in Christ regalia. Another day, the wonder of the ages driving the wonder of the age down Sunset Boulevard would have made me laugh. Today I was numb. An hour ago, my wife told me she was having an affair. I said, I'll forgive you. She said, I don't want to be forgiven. I want to leave. I walked through the shroud-like, mysterious Los Angeles dawn. Mist hung like phantoms, strange, ghostly, pale. Call it angels at your own risk. The light looked put down from another world. I was going to interview D.W. Griffith. Trust your wife to leave on the most important day. The white figure braked, stopped, and in a posh accent said, Do you require a lift? I got in. Jesus was surprised. I wasn't surprised. He sniffed. A slender hand gripped the polish wheel, and we were off, the robes and cowl billowing at 10 miles per hour. Take me to Babylon, Mr. Gay. My voice cracked. Babylon is the huge set that's become kind of, an icon for Hollywood.
Mm.
I could read more if you want.
I was hoping that you would.
Oh, great. I will give you a page here
You left
of
me
one of.
hanging there, Luke.
Well, at this point, all sorts of things have happened. Well, and he ended up, Jesus, the guy ends up actually being a nice guy, and he befriend Harrison is the name of the narrator, and so he's going back to Babylon, and he gets another ride, and he gets picked up again by the man in the Jesus robes, and he says, "You're in a ridiculously optimistic mood, Harrison." Jesus peered into a misty line of coast live oaks, 40-footers with hard, holly-like leaves and branches that grew along the ground. "Where are you, little tart? All men seek for thee." He's looking for a woman he met the other day. "We drove up and down dark hills as hints of green sneaked onto pale hillsides. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, but hoped Jesus would think about what he really wanted as he rode these morning hills. "What's Griffith like?" Jesus asked suddenly. "You talk to him all night. No one talks to him." I thought for a moment. "He's lonely." "Of course Griffith is lonely, Harrison. That's the first true thing you've said. Americans are lonely. The place is too damn big. The night is empty. Fill it with women as you may. I fill it, Harrison. I let them not be lonely for a while. I let them dream, and when they dream, they aren't so miserable. They're alone, more alone than ever, but not so lonely. A country of dreamers and maniacs, Harrison. All of you, fucked and far from home, vulgar and lonely. You feel it everywhere, on Broadway, in Chicago, on endless afternoons in the Big West. You're coyotes, Harrison, all of you, howling and running. No one can catch you. You have everything, but you're lonely. It's the American condition. You need me, the star, the robes. If you really believed, you wouldn't be lonely, but you don't. You shout in church, you confess, but you don't believe. You believe in the photoplay, the Hopmobile, the telephone. Even you, Harrison, you believe in Griffith, though you won't admit it. I thought your Harvard snobbery would protect you, but you're lonely too. The photoplay is the perfect expression of America. You pay, sit alone, and see tricks. America needs wizards. They can crawl out of Kentucky or come across the sea from the smelliest ghetto, but you must have them. That's democracy. New dreams for new solitude. The photoplay is a coyote, Harrison. I am a coyote. We sped up. Jesus stood. His robes billowed like a backward spinnaker as he clutched the wheel and yelled, "Where are you, little tart? All men seek for thee."
Mm.
So,
Well, wow. Well, Luke, tell me about, let's fast forward 300 years. What would you want when people pick up your work? What would you want your legacy to be? What would you want them to take from that?
well,
In three.
first of all, I'd like anybody to pick it up and read it. An astrologer once told me I'd be more famous after I was dead, to which I said the bar is pretty low. But each one of the novels has some kind of, big thought. I wouldn't even say philosophical behind it. The one I just read you from, I think that moment where Griffith is filming the big set of Babylon that becomes so iconic is the time when the culture is going from words to pictures to
Mhm.
visually. In the very, very last sentence of the book, there's some sense that something new is coming down. I wrote a novel called The Cleveland Indian, which is about the first Indian to play baseball. It has to do with, baseball becoming, the frontier as the real frontier disappears. This Indian had enormous ability, but drank himself. It just, in my book, he doesn't just drink himself out. He's much more active than the one he's modeled on. But there's something behind it. And the one you're reading now, it's just, I think it's very important to try to write about war. And trying to write about war and you haven't been in one is interesting. And I think I've done okay. I've tried. Some veterans have read it. Of course, my father was quite badly wounded and taken prisoner. And he said at the end of his life, "You can ask me anything I want. I'll talk about it now, but I might not remember." Well, I got a lot of information out of it. And also, there are three Salisbury books. And the first one, as you've read, and this actually happened to Salisbury and his son killed an Indian. ended up having their heads put on stakes. So,
Oh, wow.
there was justice back in those days too. Well, in the whole course of these three novels, it's sort of like there's this family curse if you have to go fight in war that's
Mhm.
finally broken by my father because he wanted to be a conscientious objector and goes in at the last minute because I think he'd been adopted and he wanted to prove he was part of the family. And this actually is literally true. He was a scout. They were caught behind lines. Most people were killed, and the guy next to him was an American Indian, and who my father knew, but not really well, who had volunteered for this because he didn't want anyone to think that Indians didn't want to fight. And they were
Right.
both badly wounded, and they actually did have, morphine, but it's not like Saving Private Ryan in INR, intelligence and reconnaissance. My father said it was a syringe, and he gave his morphine to this guy, who then died an hour later. And then my father, it wasn't until the very end of his life, he was a prisoner of war for 3 years, 3 months, excuse me. He'd been dead if it was 3 years. Had 4 or 5 wounds. He never knew exactly. He got no painkiller the whole time. So it's kind of the arc of this family and their sin. And of course, this is a novelistic way of looking at it. People knew the first Salisbury was killed by Indians, but they didn't know the story till I went and
Mhm.
looked it up. They didn't know about the heads on stakes and so on. And the other thing I want to say is the way I keep my sanity is I figure out a novel and they've turned out to be historical. And it takes, 5 or 10 years of my life, and I'm researching it and thinking about it and inhabiting that place. And as long as I'm working, I don't get too upset about everything else. Someone asked me if I feared death the other day, and I said, no, I'm so pissed off about not getting published. We can worry about that later. So get involved in your projects, and research is really fun.
The
Of course, you're
key.
researching something, you can do it forever and never start writing. So I've got a 2 year limit on how long I'm going to research something.
Wow. Well, Luke, I just wish you the absolute best in your writing and in your future. Sounds like it's going to be very interesting, no matter how it goes, because you
Uh,
are
Well,
you're pretty fascinating.
Well, I want to thank you for doing this. I mean, how many people are actually trying to help writers? And so I hope you really enjoy it. And I hope this goes big time because it's a wonderful thing you do. You ask good questions, you let those who talk too much ramble on. And it's just a delight talking to you.
Well, thank you so much. And everyone, check out Luke. He has a website. Tell us your website information.
It's just Luke Salisbury Books, and it mentions my books, and there's an autobiographical thing on it that I like, and
I do
because
too.
because you have to take yourself seriously, but not too
Not too
seriously.
seriously.
And
Well,
shall we say, I haven't been spoiled by success, so had a little, whatever.
well, thank you so much, Luke, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.